Dzień dobry, dobry wieczór. Żeby usłyszeć tłumaczenie na język polski, trzeba na dole w panelu Zooma kliknąć tłumaczenia ustne, tam gdzie jest globus, wybrać język Polish. Żeby słuchać wszystkiego po angielsku, trzeba wybrać angielski, jeżeli ktoś ma taką potrzebę, a jeżeli chcecie słyszeć w takim języku, w jakim jest coś mówione, to wystarczy wybrać opcję wyłącz. I mam nadzieję, że to będzie wszystkim działało. Gdyby cokolwiek z takich rzeczy nie działało, to piszcie na czacie, no bo chodzi o to, żeby wszyscy rozumieli i słyszeli to, czego potrzebują. Czy są jakieś pytania do tego? Czy ktoś ma trudność techniczną teraz i potrzebuje czegoś ode mnie? Okay, so I will speak English now, so anyone needing a translation should switch to Polish. I will maybe very shortly go through our plan and then we will start. So first we will start with Katie's and team's presentation on their foundation and how they operate. Then we planned to talk some about communities, working with your local community, finding your allies, finding supporters maybe in your local community. So how to work on this local level, how to work in your neighborhood. And the second main part, we plan to talk about narratives, because Pride Foundation is doing some amazing work on that. So it will be really great to listen to some stories about this. And anytime you have some questions, you can post them on the chat in Polish or in English, and I will ask them like speaking. And also for the last part, we will have some time for any questions, even not related to anything we spoke and was presented on the meeting. So I think that's all from this like technical point of view. So, and this meeting, one last technical thing is that the meeting is planned to last for 2 hours, so have some water on your hand, because we won't be stopping once we start talking and discussing. So once again, anytime you have a question, you can post it on chat, and I will try to ask them as soon as possible, like out loud, and find time for that. So officially starting. Hello everyone, my name is Clara Gubera and I'm from Fundusz dla Odmiany, so for a Change Fund. And with us is Katie Carter from Pride Foundation, with Kim and Jose, who will probably very shortly tell us all about their work. Just 1 second, Katie, I will give you all the voice in the world. One last thing is that we're very glad that this meeting is possible because of help from U.S. Embassy in Warsaw. So hello, Małgorzata Działak from the embassy is here with us. So welcome everyone, welcome our grantees and our friends from the fund, and my friends from the team. And it's great to have you all here, and it's great to have you, Katie, and you guys from Pride Foundation here. So hello, and I think it's good time to start now.
Well, thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here with you all. As Clara mentioned, my name is Katie Carter, she and her pronouns. I'm the CEO at Pride Foundation. I will share a little bit more about Pride Foundation I have a few slides to just give us a little bit of overview. But I just wanted to start by saying this is the second session we've gotten to do, and it's just really incredible to be building across time zones, across geography, across experience in these ways. And it's just a really beautiful way that we're so excited to be able to share with you all. And I know that we'll be answering a lot of questions, but I will just name that we're also very eager to learn from you all and what you're doing, what tactics, strategies, you're finding that are working there, because I think while The spaces that we're working in are very different. There's a lot of similarities as well. And so I just want to name too that, like, to the extent that it's possible, and I won't interrupt the facilitation and how this has been going, but to the extent that we can sort of be in dialogue and sharing, I know that would be really exciting for myself and for the team that we have here. And I just want to call into this space my colleagues, Kim Sogi, who is our Director of Programs, and Jose Romero, who is our Director of Community Advocacy, Research, and Education, who are going to be also sharing here today with you all. Oh, look at it, like they popped into the screen as well. Welcome, y'all. So just wanted to start with the level of enthusiasm that we all have for you here and for this conversation, especially because I'm going to start with some slides, which might be a little bit of a dry way to start. But for those who are not familiar with Pride Foundation, I thought just to ground our conversation, I could give you like a super high level overview of the work that we do and sort of briefest of histories. And Jose and Kim, I'll call you into this conversation too to share more about the areas of work that you manage at Pride Foundation, since y'all are the experts here. So with that, I, in typical Zoom fashion, could I be made co-host so I could share my slides?
Doesn't it work once you're not a co-host? Like just share screen, the green button? Because
Oh my gosh, it's right there. I'm so sorry. I promise y'all I've used
fine.
Zoom before.
We really do. It's too early out there, so it's fine.
I mean, it's 9 o'clock. I should be on my like third cup of coffee. I should be okay. Can you all see this?
Yes.
And is it a reasonable size too? Okay, wonderful. So let me just go ahead and dive in here. Oops, there we go. So these are the states that we work in. We really, at the heart of all we do is this core belief that our community, the LGBTQ community, should be able to be who we are wherever we are. So we work across 5 states in the United States, in Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. And a lot of our work is really about thinking both regionally as well as place-based in the work that we do. And just a little note about the region that we work in, there's a lot of difference in terms of the legal protections that we have, in terms of the cultural experiences that exist, in terms of the demographic makeup of our regions. Huge areas of the region that we work in are rural or small town. We have a couple of major cities in Seattle and Portland, but we're just working across really different experiences across those 5 states. So even though it's a cohesive region in some ways, the both like legal protections that exist. For example, in Washington and Oregon, we have statewide non-discrimination protections. In Idaho, Montana, and Alaska, we do not. We have them in certain municipalities, but do not have them on a statewide level. And then, as you all know, legal protections only go so far. And so really also thinking about the cultural shifting and changing that we're working on in the region too. So we can talk a little bit more about this in the discussion, but that's sort of like the legal landscape, but then also thinking about the LGBTQ-led and serving organizations, the types of organizations, the size of those organizations and groups, the number of them in the different areas are, whether it's a more metro area, more rural area, the way that work just shows up really differently across the region. So we can get in a little bit more about that too. Just a little bit about who we are. We are the only foundation in our region who's specifically set up to support LGBTQ communities. Unfortunately, I wish there was more of us, but that's the reality for us right now. Our mission is to fuel transformational movements to advance equity and justice for LGBTQ+ people in all communities in the Northwest. And the vision that we really has is a world, and we mean that, a world in which all LGBTQ plus people can live safely and openly as our whole selves in all of the communities that we call home. So that's ultimately what we're working for. We're not there yet, but I do believe that we will get there, and excited to share a little bit about the ways in which we can do that. We were founded in 1985. Just a little, I won't go into the entire history of our organization, but just to give you a little snapshot, we were founded in the midst of the HIV and AIDS crisis, and a lot of our founders were working on the political and legislative landscape at the time, who were fighting for community and healthcare support for people who were living with and dying from HIV and AIDS. And a lot of the original resourcing, the financing for our foundation came from the fact that people were passing away and wanting to leave their estates to a foundation that was set up to support their communities, because they either their families weren't supportive of them, or they knew that there were very precious few resources for our communities to access that were really for us and by us. And so that's really where Pride Foundation was founded. At the same time, there were different groups popping up. You know, this was the mid 80s, right? Like there were more organizing happening in our region, and in particular in some of the metro areas, and really wanting to have a foundation that was set up to resource those groups, right? So we sort of were founded with this dual purpose, and over the course of the past 37 years, we have grown substantially, in part because of the incredible resourcing that community members have left us, both in their wills after their passing, but also while they were here with us, while they are here with us. A lot of our work is fueled by our community members who are investing in Pride Foundation's work, and in turn investing in our communities. And we are really set up to be a resource for the leaders, for the groups, for the organizations in the region in which we serve. So that's the briefest. Obviously, there has been many different iterations of how we have been structured, and sort of how we've done our work, what we've learned, how we've grown over the years, which we'd be happy to share about to the extent that we have time. And just to sort of share too that our maybe to get into some of the details, we are a charitable, for the IRS tax status here, we're a charitable foundation. So people who make donations to us, those are tax deductible, which in the way our tax system is set up, that theoretically is an incentive to people. To be honest with you, I'm not sure how much of that actually incentivizes people in our region more. I think it's really more about supporting our communities. You know, the why we exist is really for a broad vision of equity, justice, and liberation. Like we mentioned in our vision statement, we believe that all LGBTQ plus people should be able to live safely, openly, and genuinely in all of the different places that we call home, in all of the different spheres of our lives. And we also know that because that isn't the case right now, and that hasn't been the case, that LGBTQ people are facing inequities in nearly every area of our life, from healthcare to employment to education. And we need to have support that is targeted, that is specifically for our community in order to make a difference. And right now in the United States, there is very chronic underfunding of LGBTQ-led and serving organizations and groups. The statistic that we sometimes share is that for every $100 invested by institutional philanthropy, so by foundations, on the whole, that only 28 cents goes to specifically support LGBTQ communities and issues, which even when you think about population parity, right? Like even when you think about like, you know, depending on what statistic you're using, LGBTQ plus people make up something from 5 to 15% of the population. That isn't even a representative investment in our community, let alone when it's coupled with the fact that we're also experiencing different kinds of impacts and outcomes. But I do want to name that despite all of these sort of negative circumstances in which we work, that over the course of decades and generations, our communities have proven to be incredibly persistent, incredibly resilient, incredibly innovative, and have been able to build beautiful support structures and systems for our community with pennies and with a lot of love. So just wanting to name that despite these circumstances, incredible things have been built. And I think that that creativity, that innovation, that drive, I think is also part of the strength of our communities that we can offer. So I'm just going to really briefly go over the approach that we have. We have sort of a series of strategies that we implement to try to achieve our mission and vision. And these are our grants, our scholarship program, our culture change work, and then resource mobilization, which we've talked about. And so I'm just going to briefly run through these. Like y'all, we have a grant making program. We have a couple of different initiatives, which maybe after this little overview, Kim, I can tap you in here to talk a little bit about those different grant making initiatives. But really, we are set up to try to invest in LGBTQ-led and serving organizations across the Northwest. We try very hard to intentionally invest in those groups and organizations that are serving communities where nobody else is, who don't have access to other kinds of resources, are led and serving Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in our region, and working at the intersections of different issues of injustices. So we try really hard to make intentional investments with the relatively limited resources that we have to make the biggest impact, and to make sure we're resourcing those groups and organizations who are often cut off from other funding sources. Last year, we were really excited to be able to award more than $1.6 million in grants to 70 organizations, which is a pretty significant increase for us. Prior to sort of the pandemic and the additional resources that we were able to mobilize during that time, we were giving closer to $600,000 a year in grants. So we were able to really significantly increase this. And since our founding in 1987, we have granted more than $10 million to organizations. So hoping that those numbers continue to go up. And you can sort of see this little graph down here from our founding back in 1987, where we awarded a little over $7,000 to where we were in 2021. Similarly to our grants program, we also have a scholarship program where we're trying to invest in student leaders who are going on to some kind of post-secondary education. Especially those students who have multiple barriers to accessing education, and who are leaders in their lives, in their communities, and in their fields and their work. And last year we were excited to award just over $600,000 to 95 LGBTQ student leaders. We're poised this year to award more than $700,000 to over 100 leaders. So that isn't quite out there yet publicly, but we're just about to make those awards. And similarly, you can sort of see the growth of this program from its founding in 1993, where we had just one scholarship that we awarded that was a little over $3,000, to the significant growth in this program that we've been able to experience. We will obviously be talking a lot about this work, and Jose, I will tap you in here too to share more after this little presentation, that our work around culture change, we have called Transform Culture, and it's really about storytelling and building messaging, but doing that in a really community-led and community-centered way to make sure that we are not only resourcing the groups and organizations who are supporting our community, but doing additional work to support them in shifting culture in their home communities across the region in which we're working. And a lot of this comes out of this program in general came out of specific legislation in Washington state that was attacking trans communities, which is unfortunately still legislation, though different in the specifics. It's sort of the same in its intention, that is targeting trans communities and really using that as a base mobilizing strategy. So in addition to fighting specific pieces of legislation that are attacking our communities, our tactic here, our strategy, I should say, is really to think about how we are shifting culture in meaningful ways and deep ways, so that these types of legislation, so that the sort of landscape is inhospitable to this type of legislation even being introduced. Obviously, that is a very long-term strategy that involves a lot of community building, a lot of connection, and a lot of sharing of our stories, lives, and experiences, because that's what we know shifts people's hearts and minds, and what we've seen over the course of movement here in the United States, at least. But we will obviously talk a lot more about this during the discussion, since I know this is something that y'all are working on too. And last but not least, a lot of the sort of foundation of our work, as I mentioned, is really being able to mobilize resources for our communities. And I'll name that a big chunk of the donors who support us are LGBTQ identified people, and they are intentionally investing their philanthropic dollars in Pride Foundation because they believe in the work that they do and because they want to support our communities. But we also have done a lot of work with other foundations, with businesses and corporate partners who are not necessarily focused on LGBTQ people or communities, but who are interested in building partnerships with us and sort of partnering with Pride Foundation to make more meaningful investments. So really a lot of the work that we're doing around resource mobilization is both mobilizing funding from our community and from our allies to be able to invest back into our communities. And then we also spend a lot of time in the foundation world trying to work with other foundations to help them understand the ways in which they could and should be more intentionally investing in LGBTQ communities. So that's just a quick little overview, and maybe I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. Or Kim and Jose, if there's anything you want to add at this point, and maybe there would be some benefit to each of you talking more about the work that you're doing too during the discussion. Let's see if any questions.
I can just say that once again, I'm amazed at how like similar ideas you're expressing, and not even ideas, but like even yesterday we had a team meeting and we were talking about how in our like motto thing there is dreaming about everyone feeling at home in Poland, and you also have things like feeling at home and dreams, and it's just so similar, and it's really amazing to have a chance to have this exchange now, and I hope like in the future too. So I'm not sure if you need like any specific questions from me, or do you just want to continue on your story, Katie, and guys from your foundation?
Yeah.
I thought because there is this big part of your work is supporting granting and then supporting your grantees, and that's also who we have today with us, our grantees who live in smaller cities than Warsaw and in different parts of Poland, and they're doing their amazing work. So I just maybe wanted to ask you about like your work with grantees and with communities, and like do you have, I don't know, even any advice on, or just good practices that people do in your area. Just any inspiration you want to give us. And if you need some more specific questions, then let me know and I will ask them then.
Well, maybe here I can, maybe we can pin Kim's video and have her talk, since she is our director of programs. So Kim manages and develops the strategy and sort of theories for all of our grant making and scholarship programs. And Kim, maybe you want to, maybe a good place to start would be sort of just sort of how our grant making has evolved and sort of what you're thinking about it now and sort of the different tactics that we're taking.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Our grant making has evolved over time, and even just, I don't know, looking at your all's website before this kind of, I think we started from a similar place too, of groups of people in different communities fundraising for projects and LGBTQ work that was happening in different parts of our region. And how that has evolved over time both has been like, you know, we've increased, as Katie showed in that graph, the amount of dollars that we're able to move out to communities. So I'm hoping for that abundance of resources for your communities in Poland also. But I think that one of our main grant making sort of, or grant initiatives, is a community grants fund is what we call it. And that just very, very broadly supports organizations that are doing work in LGBTQ communities. And the way that we see it is that in order for like this sort of movement work to happen over time, organizations need continued funding and support. I think that one thing that we have also learned over the course of our history too is that even just having an organization like us or like you all that is directly supporting LGBTQ communities is very important. Like that, it's the sort of like being able to have that support of an organization available to groups to know that someone else is thinking about the work that you're doing. We also recently launched kind of a more responsive fund. So as things are popping up, as things are emerging that are sort of challenges that we're seeing, like particularly here in the States, we've been seeing a lot of legislative attacks on trans communities. We kind of thought that having something that was immediately available and responsive to communities is really important too. And a lot of that came from listening to groups. And so I know that some of you all are grantees here too. And so I would encourage just like dialogue and sharing of what's happening. Really broadly, I think too, thinking about our grant making, the connection points of organizations and individuals across our region has been really important. And in particular, I know that you all are interested in like the smaller communities across your country too, that I think that being able to have space and opportunity to share, you know, like what's happening in a certain part of our region with a grantee. And I think unfortunately, sometimes what we see is that there are these similar attacks on our communities that are happening in different places. But if we're able to share and connect with one another and connecting our grantees to one another to know also that they're not alone in what they're facing in different communities is really important too. So I don't know if that's exactly what you wanted or what you were thinking, Katie, but I think that's just like a very broad overview.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking, but it made me also wonder if you want to share just a little bit more about sort of the approach and thinking that we're taking to our grant making, specifically around using a trust-based approach and how that has really shaped. I mean, I think that's sort of the frame that we're using now, but I think that also comes from like the years of experience that we have and like our philosophy toward, you know, giving general operating support, investing early, and like what other philanthropy might call like risky things where we're like, nope, these are just community groups doing their thing and we want to invest in them in a significant way. So maybe that piece would be interesting to folks too.
Yeah, I think kind of the piece there is that like this saying that I kind of have of like we believe that communities like leaders and communities know best sort of the solutions to like the challenges that they're facing, and so really trusting that groups and individuals across our region like they know where they know where LGBTQ people are gathering, they know the challenges that LGBTQ people are facing, and so we trust that in funding them sort of without any strings attached, just if they come to us and say this is what we're hearing and seeing and working on, um, that like that those are the groups that we want to be funding, because they're kind of this idea that the people who are closest to the issues and the challenges like have the solutions and can build the solutions to creating this world where everyone can live safely and openly. And so I think that has been a move for us over time, rather than saying like to an organization, here we're going to give you this funding and you can only use it for this one small project. Now we're saying, here's some money for this project, use it as you see fit for whatever your community is facing. We want to remove as many, like we know that LGBTQ people already face so many barriers that we don't want to be, as like an organization by and for our community, we don't want to be providing more challenges to in terms of just receiving funding.
Sorry, may I have just one question to Kim? Thank you. Kim, I'm Alexandra Ola, and I'm the co-founder of the For a Change Fund. I'm just want to ask you about this your grant making approach. I mean, do you now try to mostly focus on building, I don't know, long-term relations with your grantees, for example, multi-year funding or something like this, or maybe you prefer to, find new groups, new organizations or something like this, or maybe you mix those two approaches? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think both is kind of what we are seeing and hearing. I think if we look back at like the last 10 years of our movement, and I think we hear a lot that like we need to fund movements for 10 years because that's how social movements take shape and change. And I think that for us, we're trying our best within the structures that we have in place and funding that we have to continue to provide longer term grants to organizations, while at the same time recognizing that there are always, at least here and I'm sure everywhere, there are always small groups popping up in different parts of our region who are new and responding to different issues. So we want to hold both of those at the same time. I think historically too, what we've seen is that when we do consistently fund groups for say like the last 5 years, even though that wasn't how we structured, like we didn't structure it 5 years ago saying we're going to give a 5-year grant, but because of the nature of our funding, we funded a group consistently, that we've seen them grow, establish, be able to hire more staff, for example, be able to seek further funding. A lot of what we see in our grantees is like, if you fund them for a few years and then we use sort of our influence within the sort of philanthropic and grant making sector here to say, look, there's this organization that's doing really incredible work, and try and help them seek other funding too, that will inherently help them grow as well, both in funding and just getting their exposure out there to other agencies. So it's sort of a both and for us, I think.
So maybe I will like start with my questions some more. I really like what you said, and we agree with that about like the community's knowledge about their needs and like their priorities. And it's so great that they have this creative freedom of using the funds how they feel they need to. But I wanted to ask if there is some, I don't know, maybe advice that you give to your grantees. For example, there is like organization who is just starting, or maybe even a person who doesn't have an organization yet, but has a, like lives in some community and sees the need to start some work there. Is there like, I don't know, general piece of advice, or do you try to, I don't know, investigate more on the community? How would you approach such person? What would you say to them?
I think I certainly, and Katie, you can chime in because Katie has done many jobs at Pride Foundation also and has experience with this, but a lot of, like, when we've met with individuals who are just starting out in different communities, I think, I saw the question that you had of like, how do you find your allies? And I think a lot of it has been like, where in your community, in your home community, where might be a place that LGBTQ people are gathering, or where are places that people are accessing services that you might be able to provide. Like you might be able to have sort of an inroad of someone who might be friendly or an ally. I think here in our region, like a lot of those places are sort of public spaces like libraries, where are people hearing stories of like, how can you, and I think this is tangentially to Jose's role in terms of our culture change work, but like, how are we finding the places where there are like access to LGBTQ stories? I think a lot of times where a lot of people start to is in schools, seeing, and I know that has some pieces of your origin story too, of like, how are LGBTQ young people able to see themselves reflected in communities. And so I think that's kind of in terms of like sort of finding your allies. I think that bringing other people along too, finding other supportive people to help you in your work that you're trying to engage in. I think that a lot of times when we're meeting with individuals who are starting out, encouraging them to find a group of people also to engage with whatever you're wanting to do. Katie, I don't know if you have other thoughts there, or Jose.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, but maybe I'll turn it to Jose first. I saw you go off mute because I know you've got some thoughts here, and I'll maybe chime in at the end.
Absolutely. So good evening, y'all. It's a blessing to be here with you. My name is Jose Romero. I use they and them pronouns. And I have the privilege of being the director of care at the Pride Foundation, which stands for Community Advocacy, Research, and Education. So I get to work alongside Katie and Kim and a really dynamic team to do storytelling and really change the culture, right? To work towards that goal that Katie mentioned, right? Of not only ending these attacks that our community is facing, but making our communities inhospitable, right? Where those attacks couldn't even take root. And, prior to this session, I did do a little bit of reading about the context in Poland. And I was reading a little bit about the movement there. And what I saw was that a lot of the movement has been primarily legislative, which makes a lot of sense with, how we see work happening. And I found this fun article about the LGBT movement in Poland. I'm dropping it in the chat maybe in case y'all have seen it before. But one of the things that I love about your organization after seeing this article is that y'all do funding for a variety of different things beyond just operational support, right? You do outdoor events. You do groups and leader empowerment, right? I'm reading your website right now. Community building, teaching and learning, right? Crisis support, all of those are exactly what Kim is just saying, right? Around finding where people are and meeting them where they are and being able to not just have one way that people can interact with us, right? Grants are one way that we want people to be a part of our ecosystem, and we want to have a variety of different ways that people can show up for each other. And you know, one of the things that I love to do, especially with what we were just talking about, is make maps, right? Where are people hanging out? And I think I saw that, I don't know how useful this map is. It's in Polish, which I admit that I don't speak, but I saw this here, which is a map of different anti-discrimination policies, right, in Poland, across the country, and mapping them out. Where are our people? And actually going there and traveling. And in my role, I have the blessing actually of being able to travel. And so a couple of weeks ago, I was just in Montana. This is one of our village council members, and we were doing a community organizing workshop, right? About what does it look like to come together, spend some time, and actually just bring LGBTQ folks together and actually just spend some time together in space and recognizing the value of that. So here we are in Montana. And so that's part of our work, actually having a presence in each of those 5 states, right? And being able to show up where our region is. So going where your people are, actually being present, doing that work, breaking bread with each other. That's community organizing, right? And when you're doing legislative work, many of us have done legislative work, you know, a law might still get passed. And we've seen that happen in our region. And what's going to keep your people coming back is the culture. We want our movements to feel good so that people will keep coming back, right? We also don't want our work of achieving freedom to exhaust us so that when we're actually there, we're not even able to enjoy it, right? So that's part of what we're trying to accomplish together. And what that looks like for me, just a little bit more on the specific side, is that I have a village council that I manage. I'm jumping around with the slides. I hope that's okay. But I have a village council. So this is our logo here. This is the Pride Foundation. And we work in these 5 states. And we have a village council, which has 16 people. And those are leaders in the different 5 states that we've identified, some of whom are grant recipients, right? Some of these folks work at organizations which are grant recipients, and some of whom aren't, right? And so this is another body that we work with of leaders that help make sure that we're doing a good job at the Pride Foundation, and that help us also be able to really show up for our community in new and exciting ways. And there's 16 folks, won't get too deeply into it, but I wanted to share some of the quotes from the Village Council with y'all, if that's okay. I'll drop them in the chat. Really want to give some gratitude to our interpreters, the language interpreters and the sign interpreters. Y'all are wonderful. And I don't have this translated, so my apologies, but wanted to just share a few of these quotes with y'all, which is that this is how our storytelling work, right? That messaging and media push people to believe a certain way, and that works. But how do we share the stories of trans and gender diverse folks in a way that moves people along, right? So asking ourselves that question, right? Also, another question, which I think really resonates with the context in Poland, right? What does it mean to know your life is at risk and yet you are not represented in any of the media, right? These are the questions that our community is asking, right? And knowing that people want to erase us, make us invisible, we have to share our stories, that's part of our power, right? And that's how we're doing our change work, right? So we have this village council of some of our grantees and other community leaders. We're doing storytelling with them, and also empowering them to do storytelling with their own communities. So we're working on launching an archive of sorts, where we'll have stories from our grantees and other community members, just LGBTQ folks across the Northwest where we work. And it'll be something that folks can use in their advocacy, and also just see and hopefully find some joy in, right, as well. I'll put some examples of the storytelling we've done so far in the chat as well, so that y'all can see this. One of them is a really fun one, which was virtual reality. So you would put on a headset and you'd actually be able to hear the stories of trans community members and Two-Spirit community members in the Northwest talking about their lives and what it's like. Recently, I asked the village council to tell me, what is this the year of for you? And they told us like a different mission that they had for the year for each of them. Some of them included, holding organizations accountable, but some of them were just about joy and finding peace and calm. And that's a part of our work as well, right? But all of this has to do with, developing a common language as well. So another reason why I love that y'all have interpreters, but, developing a glossary, making maps with each other, learning to have fun. That's going to keep people coming back. And it's going to have those folks that have already received grants from y'all tell other people, come and work with this organization, because they know how to get the job done, and it feels good when you're getting the job done. And I can tell y'all, I recently joined the Pride Foundation, and it is very rare for me to have this experience where former staff and even people that I run into on Grindr will talk to me about the Pride Foundation being a place that they really love. So just letting you know that that's part of our story as well. Yeah, I know that was a lot.
No, I love all of that. And I love the multifaceted outreach strategies you're thinking through there. And I think the only thing I wanted to sort of add to all of the amazing things y'all just shared is just like thinking about the history of not just Pride Foundation, but of our region and how things have looked. And like so many of the groups that we're funding now, many of whom have full-time staff, many of whom are connected to the village council, started with like one person who was like, this is not okay. Like the way that things are in my community is not okay. And I need to make sure my community is taken care of, and I'm going to build this thing. Right. And I just want to like give a shout out to those people who like were the leaders who were like, I'm going to do a thing and I'm going to find some other people to do this thing with me. And we're going to just make it happen through like, honestly, through sheer willpower, because most of the time nobody there, like searching for funding was not the first thing that a group tends to do, at least in my experience, that kind of comes later, because that's not what they're thinking about. They're thinking about how to keep their community safe. They're thinking about how to make sure that people have access to the resources that they need, how to fight back against some awful piece of legislation or, experience of discrimination that people were having in some other area of their lives. And that's really where so much of the work came from that Kim has heard me tell this story before, but in my early work with Pride Foundation, I found myself traveling. I was working in Oregon at the time, that so many of the groups that I was meeting with, I was like almost convincing them to apply for funding from us, because they were like, well, we're just doing the work. What do we need the funding for? And I was like, well, you don't have to pay for this all yourselves. You don't like, is there a way that this could help, sort of support you to do more programming or to pay yourselves, because we do believe in people getting paid for their labor, right? If, like, while we like very much support volunteering and, sort of the activism that necessarily happens, but sorry, there is like some serious stuff happening in my neighbor's yard right now. If you all are hearing like something in the background, my apologies. But trying to make sure that there are ways that we are resourcing people. So that was just some of the early work that I got to do at Pride Foundation, was sit down with groups who had not been grantees before, but they were like, had to do some work to sort of convince them that funding was available, that they deserved funding, right? Like I remember there was one group that we like had to convince them we like gave them a bigger grant than what they applied for, And then like 2 years later, they were still like sitting on that money because they were like just doling it out here and there. And we were like, no, we'll give you more if you keep going. And so just also thinking like about that creative way that we know our communities are using resources, but also like interrupting this idea that the work that we're doing doesn't deserve to be resourced or that we should somehow be funding it ourselves. But I think some of that unlearning too, that like we deserve resourcing, we deserve to be supported, and we, you know, deserve to be able to live and thrive and have the funding to do so as well. And also knowing that funding is just one piece, right? Like that is not the end all be all. Like that sometimes, you know, provides the food at an event, or, you know, creates the opportunity for people to travel and move together, but that's only one piece of like the very, very important community building work that we're talking about too. So maybe I'll stop there and see if other folks have questions, or Clara, if you have other ways where I know we're going wide, so feel free to
Yes,
have us.
we are. It's all so interesting. Yeah, it's maybe that's the moment. Oh, Greta, would you like to ask a question? Because you're raising a hand.
Yeah. I would like to ask about community building, about, you know, like making communities wanting to stay together, wanting to be together, do something together, to like making the contacts, making the support contacts. Do you have any golden tips for us? Like maybe some good ideas of how to start, of what is helping and what is the opposite of helping during like this type of work?
And maybe just before you start answering, I would introduce Greta, who is our grantee and who is organizing like her local LGBT plus community in a small city of, not that small, city of Tarnów. And they're doing the first like public visible events like a picnic. And so there's like trying to make the rainbow people like be visible there. So that's who Greta is. And yeah, that's now you can answer her.
Yeah, I can offer some comments here. And Greta, you know, that's so wonderful that you're doing that work of visibilizing our people, right? And you're doing one of the first key things right now, which is connecting with peers, right? So that you don't do this alone. You know, a certain degree of self-care and protection is very necessary for this work, right? So want to name that. And
Yeah,
because
totally.
that's
Like
important.
like feeling safe, feeling like having this like feeling that the environment is safe, that the people are going to be calm during the events, and feeling that they are in the right spot, that they have like the place for them. Like this, there's a very, very like it's very important for people to like feeling safe, and so we are kind of like in the position that we have to ensure that that the safe space is like included in the tape of our work, because we are like, if you would look at the map, like this hate atlas of hate, if you would look around the Tarnów, we are like a donut. All around is a red, and Tarnów is like in the middle, like kind of like green. But it's like this is kind of feeling like being stranded on the island, you know, and we're trying to reach for people like outside of this donut sometimes, but we kind of want like to go like inside also, because lots of young people are coming from the county of Tarnów, like from this like red donut all around us, and we kind of want to like build some space, like maybe not in like the materials space, but like this feeling that they are like welcome. They are welcome in the Tarnów. They can have like safe space for them, and they can hang out with us or with other peeps that are like younger or older, like to have somebody to talk about, because there's also like this very hard feeling, and maybe not hard feeling because it's like different, it means something different, but there's like this feeling with people that they are all alone, like they have nobody,
Mm.
like somebody like them. And we kind of want to like start to build this like support connections to people, like knew where they can find us, that we are cool, and they can just come to us and talk with us. But if we want to do this, we have to like make this basic work at the beginning to like I don't know how to say it, but we have to be like recognizable and be like have this like patch that we are like they are cool, like they are okay, and you can just hang out with them.
Well, in my opinion, you are cool. So let the record show. Yeah. What I would offer is one that if you and I ever want to have a one-on-one, I'd be happy to touch base. We could do that. That's always part of this work. But at large, have multiple ways to connect with each other, right? In person and virtually. But there are some very specific things around safety. You mentioned physical safety, and that's a whole nother conversation right there. Being able to assess, here we sometimes use the stoplight imagery where it's like, if it's a red zone, it's like very bad, but if it's yellow, it's like okay, if it's green, it's good. And using tools like that when you're talking to people, like, oh, like this place, we're going to go to it, but it might be a yellow today, or it might be a red. Things like that, where you actually start using, like, preparing people for what they might be walking into, and having a database around how many times you've tried to reach out to somebody. Usually I think the standard, it's like every 3 days. If you send a message, like that's a good standard for like being able to reach out so that you don't overwhelm people. Things like that, where it's like very specific things. But at large, I would say, make a decision about whether you want to be in a fixed location or if you want to rotate locations. And that really is going to be context dependent. Some people want to be like, okay, we found a safe building. They're able to host a support group meeting here. And actually, we're going to have all of our meetings here, and we're going to make the community know that this is a place that they can go to. Or you can rotate, and you can have it be in a variety of different places. And there are pros and cons to both, right? Because then people will be able to get more exposure to your work. And actually, it might be able to have some more safety, right? Depending on where you're going, right? Here with our work, we really tried to follow the lead of the grantees and the village council, as far as like organizing. Our work has also been legislative. And some of the things that we have seen is where people are afraid, right, to go and do advocacy because, people might be carrying weapons at the advocacy buildings, right, at the state buildings. And that's a very real concern, given some of the laws and the places that we work. And, in those contexts, am I going to be here and tell somebody like go anyway? No, like, we really try to meet people where they're at and just try to give people as many opportunities to engage and reimagine like what advocacy looks like too, right? It's not just winning legislation, right? It's taking care of each other. It's helping each other be safe. And those are our values. One of the first things that people see when they see like the Pride Foundation is the values that we have. And, when you're making this peer support group, let that be one of the first conversations too, like what are the values that we want to have in this space? Maybe privacy is one, because of all of the surveillance that there is. But so much that we could share there. And I mean, it's gonna look different over time, but finding your peers, figuring out what safety looks like, meeting locations, more, and meeting with people like me and other people that are down to support you. That's also part of it. Yes, but you are cool. You are cool. No.
You are awesome. Also, I'm in a huge shock because when you said that your fund like became like the organization in the 1995. Do I remember correctly?
85.
85. So I wasn't even on Earth like yet. My mother was just like around 10 years old. So it was for me it's a huge like see, I'm pretty sure that you see like the difference also now, you know, from the when the internet just went in, when everybody, lots of people has access to the internet, like the speed of movements, of changes in the culture and all around us. It's like it's a real speed, you know, and I'm pretty sure that if there is somebody in your phone that was at the beginning and seeing what's going on now, I'm pretty sure it might be also a great history to like listen about it, how they see it and how they perceive like all these changes and how the work is changing, you know, like the needs of the community, the needs of the people that are working with the community. So for me, it's also, I'm in a shock with how far you are with your organization and how much things you're doing. Like it's really amazing. So I was also, I have to admit that when I was looking for the funds for our organization, I just stumbled upon your website and I was reading about, and I was heartbroken that you work only in the United States. But I said, okay, it's fine, I guess. And yeah,
Don't,
so
don't
I
worry,
just,
Greta. You have
yes, it
our
was like,
fund. Don't.
yeah, it's like it's so good that Fund for Change is like in Poland, and I have no idea how it would look like if I didn't like made a contact a year ago. It was like very it was something like from the day today I was just like chilling and there was somebody like, oh, you should change, you should see this is a fund for change. You don't need to have like this organization, you don't have to be a fund, you can be like just a group of people and you can just try, you can even be like one individual and try. And I tried and that's how I am here. So yeah, so I, as I said, in a very big like awe of how you're working and how much knowledge you have, and I'm also very grateful that I can be here today and listen you and like ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess Greta, in 30 years, you can host a meeting like this about tęczowy Tarnów, which means like rainbow Tarnów, and you will also give us your like origin story of your organization. Okay, I will maybe like try to summarize what has been presented to this point, because there were so many points that I'm sure I won't remember all of them, but so one thing that we discussed is when you are like just one person or a small community, that you're starting work in your local community or just in your neighborhood, the first thing is to find allies, or just find other friends, other people, or just look for other like-minded people. Maybe you don't even know them, but I think, Jose, it was you who said that, thinking like in a geographical kind of way, like thinking about the places where people gather. My first thought was like, it's easier for you because in the US you have so many like community centers and libraries where people gather, but the second thought, I think people like, we have to also be meeting here in Poland. Maybe I just don't know yet where it is happening. So I think it's a great advice. So we can all like write this down to think about the places where the people already are, and also the virtual space, even like the grinder. I mean, it was joke, I guess, but even thinking like maybe if if we want to go to the library, we can go online and try to look for people like from our location, and maybe it's easier to find people online, actually, just in your, I don't know. What I'm thinking about right now is to just go on a Facebook group of your neighborhood and look for people who have, I know, like rainbow sticker on their photo, and even that can be a first step of looking for some like-minded guys. And what you said is, I think like what we can all gather from what you're saying is just like to just start doing something, just find people, just start meeting, and everything can go from then. Like even your Pride Foundation started somewhere else, and now it's in a very different place. And also, it's great advice. Like once you have the energy and the idea that something should change, just try and do the something, and you don't always have to have like this huge plan and huge funding, and can just start and see what happens later. And that's not that bad of an idea. Like why not actually? So I think that was, or maybe it was only me who needed the recap, but I needed that, so that's what happened. I mean, I have so many more questions, but maybe like one second for someone else to raise a hand. And if not, it will be me speaking some more. I'm maybe Jose, if you would like to say, like, tell us some more about the narratives work that you're doing, because it's so amazing, and I don't know if I've heard about similar like thing happening anywhere else. So if, because I know from the previous meeting with Katie, like we heard some about this, like you're gathering the stories, but if you maybe wanted to tell us like what this program actually is. And what I'm getting is that you're gathering all these stories and then you will use them in some advocacy work. But if maybe you wanted to tell us some more, that would be really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just wanted to name it, like Kim had the role of kind of traveling around one of the states that we work in. And so just had also been present in a lot of places. So like what you're saying about finding people where they're at, like Kim had been doing that for Pride Foundation for several years and really was just out there. And so Kim and some of the other staff have definitely been recommending like Facebook groups or like other places for me to get information from. So that's definitely a good strategy of thinking of, yeah, where are people meeting virtually, and starting there. As far as the work that I'm doing with around storytelling and narrative building, how it started, Katie mentioned this a little bit, was that there was a community member, and I don't know if Jeremiah had ever received funds from Pride Foundation prior to this relationship, maybe had worked as a volunteer, an intern, but was this, can you remind me, Katie?
So Jeremiah was working at Pride Foundation as a fellow, and we actually launched this program and like hired him as our first director of the program.
So Jeremiah, yeah, is a community member that was working at the Pride Foundation, and there was a bill that was proposed around regulating bathrooms and just gender identity in Washington State. And Jeremiah proposed this idea, and organizing as like an idea for philanthropies is relatively new. And I'll admit that to some degree. For philanthropic entities to be involved in organizing, there is this is some new ground, right? And so what that looked like for us was actually being able to invest in a campaign, right? To stop a specific law, right? From being able to pass. Since that work, it has transitioned to now be essentially a department of our work. And we are now engaged in longer term storytelling, which is not just tied to one campaign. And one of the reasons for that is because if we tie our success to a legislative win, we know that these governors, these governments weren't necessarily designed for our people to really win, right? Or be healthy, right? So we need to have our own idea of success. And what that looked like was finding our people and being able to share their stories. And during that campaign, one of the things that we often heard as far as narratives was that people wanted to frame trans community members as just the same as everybody else, right? The trans people are just like cis people, right? We're the same, we want to get married, all of these things, and for some folks, that might be the case. But we know that if we are using same ideas, right? Like the idea that I am the same as somebody else to achieve victory, that's going to limit us, right? Because not everyone is the same. right? Some of us might be sad. Some of us might be ambivalent, right? And that's part of our lives. That's part of our work. And so we started wanting to create our own stories. And that's also part of like how we got to this point. And what that looked like was bringing together a crew of different leaders from across the region that eventually became this village council. So we found leaders in each of the 5 states that we work in. And since you're in, maybe, I don't know how geographically Poland is divided, but maybe if you wanted to do like the different regions of Poland, for example, somehow, that could be a thing. But we found leaders from each of the 5 states that we work in. They formed a village council. That village council is paid. So they are paid to help us do storytelling. So I'm not doing this by myself. So they have a contract with us. And together we've been identifying what are the kinds of stories that we want to share. And what came up for people was stories about law and criminal justice. And also, as we can imagine, because it's a global pandemic, stories about healthcare. So those are the 2 kind of stories that we've been kind of like areas of stories that we've been engaged in. And folks are getting training right now to actually go into the community and start collecting some of those stories. And once we get them together, what we're going to use those stories for, and it's already happening, right, is actually going to do some lobbying. Not lobbying, maybe I won't use that word. This is recorded. To do some advocacy with legislators, right? Sharing those stories with legislators who are actually writing laws, because some of them actually, allegedly don't know any trans people. So there's that. And then also to find more community members to just make our family, our network bigger. And we got some ideas in store for once we actually have all of the stories together and what might happen, potentially funding some more organizations that are doing work related to those stories and having them carry that work forward. But right now, it's really about trying to find another way to invest in the community and have people feel like they can have a place to share their stories. And so it's going to look like a website with different stories available on it. And then there's going to be some themes there of like the different stories that are present, and organizations are going to be able to use them for a variety of different things. And we're going to share those with our grantees and do so much more. But I feel like that was a lot. So let me pause and see if there's any follow-up questions.
No, I mean, it was like, it wasn't that much. It was a story about such an amazing thing that I could listen to it on and on. I think it's so, like, it's a really good idea to have stories as a resource, like thinking about, like, we have all different resources, and yeah, as a fund we know that grants and money is one, but like we know different things and it's all our resources. But having a story as a resource and also being able to share with each other, like we're like between different activists to do the work together, it's a really great point. Like we don't have to be using our stories like our own, because we don't have all the same experiences. And so it's so great, and I hope it will be public so we can also use that.
Absolutely. And I did drop a link to one of our reports in the chat. And so there you can kind of see written out some of the evolution of the program till now. And it has a variety of quotes too, including the ones that I had dropped in the chat. And I'll share with y'all that, as somebody who is non-binary and grew up in the Northwest, just reading these stories, it's helpful even for me, right, to even just be able to encounter this work. And just hearing other trans folks talking about what it's like to be trans is that you can't really put a value on that. And so, especially right now in the US, there's so much of an attack on youth, right? And sometimes youth aren't going to be able to be in the room with adults, right? Or with other people who are going to be unapologetic. But what they might be able to access is these stories, these written words that you can sneak in on a piece of paper, that you can literally, like hiding, especially in the US, they're trying to ban all of these books that have queer and trans people. So stories matter, right? Stories actually really have an impact. Sorry.
Katie, did you want to add something or?
I was just nodding enthusiastically that stories matter, that representation matters, having that both, you know, the quote you shared earlier, Jose, too, about like not having representation in media is impactful, but also like not even like in media or on TV, but just like being able to have like a visual connection or tangible connection, whether it's through social media or through something else, to somebody else whose lived experience might parallel your own, can be life-saving, right? Can help you feel connected and not alone in different kinds of ways. And so I think when to Greta's question earlier too about like community building, like some of it is really just being able to see one another, right? And that visibility isn't only important, how do you say this, like isn't only important for like our community to be seen, but it is also important for us to be able to see one another and to be seen by our community in a way that can be really life-giving. And I think that oftentimes we think about and talk about storytelling in the context of legislation, of like of culture shifting, of moving legislation, of convincing the people who are not our community to love and care about us and to you know, include us in meaningful and deep ways. But I also want to like just uplift that storytelling is also incredibly vital for our own psychological and emotional well-being, for the ability for us to be seen within our own community and to have that kind of deep resonant connection with each other is a really powerful tool to do the community building work that helps. Like for me, that's like the root of where, like whether you want to use a frame of resilience or persistence, like how we continue to move forward despite the barriers in front of us, despite the attacks that we're experiencing, is that connection with our community members who share aspects of lived experience, share beliefs in the kind of world we're trying to create, and that there is great power to be drawn from those connections as well, not only in the tool that it can be used to create empathy from our allies and from other people, but the tool that it can be used to create connection and strengthen the power that we have as community too. Which I didn't realize that I wanted to say all of that, but I guess I did. So just sharing that.
It was really powerful and really important, I believe. And yeah, I really like what you said, because there is like some talk, there's always a talk about like coming out, and is this kind of a responsibility of LGBT people to come out. Like responsibility is not a great word, but like there's some arguments that homophobia is there because people don't know like queer and LGBT plus people. So once more people come out, they can stop being homophobic because they will know some. So I'm really like hot and cold about this idea of making like a public come out because of trying to like make the community more visible to the outsiders, like in a, quote marks. But what you said about doing this for the community, for others like us, I think it resonates with me so much more. Like I don't, maybe it's my personal point of view, not the funds or whatever, but I'm not that sure about like just being out and proud because some straight cis neighbor will see me and change their life, but some other like LGBT plus person feeling safer because they don't feel that alone in my neighborhood. That's what's really important, and I also think that's what like community work is about, and just like activism is about, and yeah, the empowerment of one another within the community. That's so great, and that's also so great having these stories. Just even if it's person so far away from us geographically, we can see that just someone else is going through the same thing as us, and we're not that alone. We're not weird, and that's super normal. I think that's really great. And now, like, that was my point. And now I have another question. So another chance for someone else to ask. And if not, I'm doing this. Okay, great. So that's because I'm sure that once you have all these stories, I mean, sure, yeah, I'm pretty sure that people from the community will want to read them because they make us, the stories make us feel like all different things and are just important and powerful. But the question would be how to make other people like hear those stories, hear our narratives, how to like find our platform, maybe within our local community, to because the stories are gathered, but they're like it's the inside knowledge, and how to make it have them read, like have to actually find people interested enough to engage in them.
Yeah, so much. Really think that that's a really powerful question, and that's the $1,000,000 question to some degree, right? How do we get people to hear us? And you know, I think that there's a couple of things here, and I actually wonder that with the principles of trust-based philanthropy, which I'm also like absorbing, one of the ways that we're shifting of our evaluation strategy, right, is also about what are people learning, right, in the work that they're doing, right, rather than necessarily like thinking in deliverables. What are the stories that people can share about the projects that they did? So there's that piece around, and I would love, Kim, if you want to like weigh in here, but like around how we're interacting with grantees, right, and what we're expecting of them, and storytelling as being one of those ways that we can kind of like engage with each other, rather than like thinking like, oh, here's like our final report of like everything that we did and all of those things, right? But storytelling is one of those things. So there's that internal, and then on the external side, as far as like finding stories and sharing them and having people hear. So also sorry if for the interpreter, you might hear some sound in the background. So we paid these leaders, so they're contracted and they're helping us work in their community. And so they're spread out. And so we basically have another team that's also working across the region to do this work, right? So there's that level, and they are already connected. But also, like I mentioned before, you can either create, have like a fixed location where you want people to come, or you can have multiple locations where people can where you are just having maybe less deep relationship building with people, but maybe you're able to like bring them in and take that first step with each other. So we're really deciding there, like, do we want a website that's like fixed, like everybody come to this website, share, click this link, share your story, or do we want to go out to multiple places, like have people, like maybe somebody that I've never met before come and talk to me, and we find a way to collect those stories. So I think there's that kind of dynamic of figuring out, and we do a little bit of both. So we have people who are going out in different places, and we're going to have a website where people are going to be sharing their stories. But you don't have to necessarily do both. You can do one or the other. There's some other pieces there, but I think there's this piece too around just kind of internally reflecting with our grantees. And I don't know if you wanted to share anything there, Kim, around storytelling and grantees, but yeah, we have a lot of grantees. So we fortunately have a lot of people that we're already working with, right? They have really good stories. So.
Yeah, what I was gonna say too is that I think like storytelling can be so like formalized in a certain way, which I think is a lot of what the program that Jose is working with is like, in a certain way is formalized, and that like a lot of the storytelling that we do like really broadly at Pride Foundation is both sharing with our grantees what we're hearing, stories of other grantees so that they don't feel as alone, kind of to Katie's point, bringing organizations together. I think there are these like overlapping circles of influence, and it kind of makes me think too of like the power mapping tool, just like of who do I know and how can I share the story of this Zoom webinar that I went to today, and I learned about this group in Poland, sort of thing, you know, like, I think that also the like sort of informal ways in which narratives and stories are shared can be like on such a small level. And then I do think that, like Jose's point too, of like having a website, sharing our stories in certain strategic ways is important too, but like that really broadly also just being like, oh yeah, we do have this grantee that's in a certain part of our region, here's what they're doing, here's what they're working on, how can I tell that story to someone else in a position of influence or power in some way that can help change. And then I think also we have the like formal way of like, we know this is what the village council and what our community advocacy work is doing, and we want to formally share these stories too, because it will help amplify the work, but that there's so many different ways that stories flow through our lives, I guess. So I don't know if that's exactly what you meant, Jose, but
Yeah, it's actually perfect, because something, and this is a little heavy, so I'll give y'all a bit of a warning before sharing this, but you mentioned, you know, grantees sharing stories with each other. And since we do advocacy in our 5 states, I'll share, you know, for example, one of our states is a state that's called Idaho, and another one of our states is a state called Alaska. Both of these states have been putting forward anti-trans legislation. And in the state of Idaho, during the advocacy there, with the work that we were the organization we've been working with, we found that the legislators, when we would tell them that their laws promoted suicide, they did not care. They actually were not moved by that. They didn't care about that research or their literature. But, and they were actually more moved by doctors. And so like the scientific community there, you know, and religion. In the state of Alaska, when the community members would share stories about how the laws were affecting suicide rates, that did have an impact. That did actually change legislators there. And it was different. And that's only something that we could know through that exchange between our grantees and through us being a regional convener, right? That can help build bridges between these different campaigns, right? They're both working towards the same thing, fighting similar laws, but in both cases, the narrative strategy had to be a bit different, right? And so that's one example that I can share with y'all. It looks like we have a question.
Natalia.
Hi, hello. My name is Natalia. My pronouns are she, her. I'm feminist and queer activist, and I'm amazed with the stories and the content of the seminar and with your work in the Northwest. The topic of storytelling is something I'm really interested in, especially in terms of this care perspective, taking care of each other and self-care and collective care, as storytelling may be something, and it usually is something that is burdening people from majorities having certain experiences. These experiences are usually difficult, and I have also some experience in telling my story as a member of queer community, and this is for me a field of many different choices around how vulnerable I want to be sharing my story on behalf of others, to make it public, to use it as a tool, as a strategic tool. And because I'm a founder and a leader of a foundation which is called Regeneration, and it's about regenerative activism, especially in the field of human rights activism and the activism of those who belong to communities of targeted identities. So for me, storytelling is something very, very powerful because it's about connections and about being with one another. It's about co-regulating, but in the same time, it may be about being very vulnerable in spaces and with people who do not understand. With my difficult stories of me or other people being violated, dehumanized. So I'm wondering, how do you think about that? Whether you with this, using this storytelling and private, like your own stories, and encouraging others to use their stories. Do you have any means of protection for them, or recommendations and preparation process for them, how to take care of them, not to end up exploited by the majority groups and privileged people who love hearing stories of dramatic stories? So do you have this kind of perspective, and if so, yeah, maybe you'd like to share that as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I love that question, and well, like, I feel like I'd love to hear also like what Katie and Kim are thinking, but I'll share that my understanding, and like I mentioned, I joined Pride Foundation this year, but I've been doing storytelling work for several years, and at least this particular program is emerged precisely because the stories that were getting asked of trans folks in the Northwest were not the stories that trans folks wanted to share, right? They were either too like nice, right? Or too traumatizing, right? And so what else is possible? And for us, that meant actually, rather than asking somebody, just tell me a story, trying to create a long-term relationship with people where we have a contract for over a year, and that means I can't just ask you to tell me a story and then like leave you alone, which is sometimes what happens. My formal training's in anthropology, and people, as an anthropologist, you get dropped off in another country, and like you just collect stories and then you leave. We can't leave because we're a community foundation, so people know how to find us and can hold us accountable. And I think that that's why it's so important for us to be rooted in the community, so that people know how to be able to follow up with us. So, people have my phone number, like they can, like my personal cell phone number, they can call me, and very small things like that. But on a broader scale, consent is just key. Is key to this process. Consent is so key. Giving people the opportunity, or recognizing that people have the power to say yes or no, and really listening to them, I think, is a part of this. And knowing that there are actually several people who have been trying to tell their stories, and those folks have been getting excluded. So there's that particular work of finding those who are already trying to share stories, the work of consent and being able to give people the option, and also just trying to practice some trauma-informed care. What that looks like is taking people out for a meal before and after, these legislative sessions. In Idaho, actually, just 2 days ago, because there was a lot of testimony given by youth who had to expose themselves to some degree, make themselves vulnerable as being trans in a state that's not trans friendly. Our organizational partner, Add the Words, had a mental health day. And so what they did was they brought a therapist, and that therapist, and had a potluck, and that therapist came, and it had nothing to do with like another community event. Like there's nothing else happening. There's just a therapist, there's some group sessions, they're having meals. And that just happened a couple of days ago, right? In response to the fact that folks shared their stories. So resourcing those kinds of opportunities as well, like mental health resourcing for folks that are sharing their stories. One of the trainings that I'll share with y'all, in the US, we have a federal department, which is all about mental health and substance abuse. And they actually give free trainings to anybody that wants them around how to be a mental health first aid responder. And so they have a training, and that's something that the Village Council is about to go through related to that, so that they can be ready, because also receiving stories, you know, can be really, really traumatizing too. I mean, I work as an interpreter, you know, again, shout out to the interpreters. Interpreters are repeating the words of anybody, right? And that's another experience right there that can be very traumatizing. And so it's very similar to storytelling work. So yeah, Kim or Katie, would y'all like to add anything there? I know that y'all have plenty of experience with storytelling as well.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. I can maybe think a little bit too. I mean, to your question, we spend a lot of time thinking about this, right? Like even every time I use the word resilience, I have like an entire narrative playing in my head about that word, right? Because that resilience comes from trauma, right? Like resilience comes from the experience of trauma. And so even as we're thinking about the way that we're talking about our work, you know, while I'm sharing these slides with you, and I'm like, God, all of these slides are just sharing the barriers and the negative impact of what we're experiencing. And that's not the only story that we want to tell as a whole too, right? And so sort of how to balance the realities of what we're experiencing with the incredible ways that we have responded to it without like sort of telling this like, oh, we're so strong and we did all of this hard work even though it was tough. Like that is true, and like that is also because of the experiences of trauma, of the experiences of discrimination and oppression, and the way, like all of these other things. And so I think even when we're thinking about how to tell the story of Pride Foundation, there is a lot of complexity that we're holding on what narrative we're trying to build for our movement and for our communities. And I think that there is a lot of pressure there to tell the right story or the right narrative that will build inclusivity, will build acceptance, that I think sometimes, not always, but sometimes can sort of be in tension with the authentically true story as well, right? And so I think that's one piece. And the other one, we talked on the last call that I was on, but also we've talked a little bit here too around safety, right? And just like naming the reality that, and Jose, you mentioned this too around consent, but like thinking about the complexity of when it is safe to share your story and when it isn't, and the sort of the multiple levels in which you have to navigate that reality, and knowing too that like our movements have progressed because of mitigated and sometimes extraordinary risk of individuals and of groups and of communities to share true things even when it was dangerous. And I'm not advocating for that, right? Because I think that there are a lot of different factors and a lot of different ways that we have to negotiate that reality to be able to think of what are the ways that we can do this where we are reducing the harm that could happen, where we're thinking about the potentialities of what it would mean for somebody's story to be visible in all of these different contexts, especially with the internet and with the way that things can go viral and the way that things can be shared outside of context. So I think making sure as people are sharing stories with us, being, you know, very clear about the ways in which they're going to be shared, the potentialities that could come from that, right? Even when we're like going to highlight somebody in a newsletter, we want to make sure we let people know, you know, this is all the this is who it's going to, these are the ways that it's going to be used. If there's fundraising involved in it, to make sure that people know that so that they have all of the information. As we've talked about as well, compensating people for the time and energy to share their stories, knowing that compensation is only one component of it, right? And that like, we don't always like monetizing our stories isn't necessarily the goal here, but recognizing that that is labor to share that and to be able to compensate for that. Which I guess all of this to say, like, I don't know that we have exactly the right answers or that, but it's something we spend an awful lot of time thinking about. And maybe I can pass it to you, Kim, because I feel like we've thought about this a lot in our scholarship program and how we frame our questions for that, as well as for our grant making or for anything else that you might want to share, because I know this is something we've talked about for many years.
I think Katie and Jose have both shared some of the like specific ways in which we address it, and stepping back a little bit too, like I read or heard something recently that was like the internet and kind of like some mainstream media is not always a place for nuance. And I think that that's very true, especially as we think about storytelling, that like, you know, behind stories are also individuals with entire lives and hopes and dreams and experiences. And I think that the only thing that I'll add there is just that like acknowledging upfront that like sometimes the spaces in which we're sharing stories or stories are being shared, there's like so much more nuance to a person's life and experience, and then is just being reduced to a singular story. And so being able to hold that at the same time as like the intentions and hopes for sharing the story too, and balancing when that is necessary, when it like what are the spaces for stories, and just even in the first place acknowledging that there's just so much more that can't always be shared, I think is the only thing that I'll add, you know, just like agreeing with everything I think that Jose and Katie have shared about how we grapple with being able to share stories in a way that feels like it's honoring the story, it's honoring the individual, it's, you know, there's so much more. So I don't know if I have too much more to add, but I think just also holding for ourselves that there is so much nuance too that can't always be conveyed, and that's really hard too, to feel like we want to share a story, or that individuals do need, you know, like that sharing stories can, there's just like so much around it that, you know, that could be so many more conversations too. So.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Natalia, for the question. I think it's really like it's important what has been said here, because some of our grantees actually have projects or ideas of collecting stories from the region or from their community. So all these points can be really like important for also for them to remember when they're like the collecting. And even Mariusz here I think thought about or maybe not, and anyway some our grantees are doing that, so it's really important to honor the person that is sharing and also honor the story, but also like first think about safety and only after thinking about how to use this. So and also and like at the same time I think doing the like activism on the very local level, so organizing your local community is also just a huge advocacy work, because even if you go to a bar and ask, hey, can we have a meeting here, and yeah, who are you, yeah, we're a queer group, it's already like kind of sharing our story and doing this small part of advocacy for our community. So remembering that we don't ever have to do it or share anything personal about us, and what you said all about thinking about the safety and the place. So if we don't feel safe there, we don't have to do that. And I would say, I mean, maybe it's not like really moral, but we can kind of lie or not tell the truth. Like, we're just a group of friends and we just want to have a beer here, and it's like none of your business why we actually met, why we're meeting. Thank you, Jose, for the comment on the chat. Yeah, I think so too. So I think like the safety, but also just giving ourselves all the rights that we're doing, like we're giving everyone else who we work with. Like, we also don't have to share. We can, like, we can stay safe. We can step back from some conversation if we don't feel good with that, or even step back for community that we started organizing if we don't feel like well at the time. And I think it's also super important to have the same standards for us as for our teams or for our communities. Maybe, I know if it wasn't point or a side note, but yeah, I wanted to say that. We have 15 more minutes, so it's a good time for some other questions. I think we're at the point like we can do any question that you wish, because we're like going from one topic to another. And Greta. Okay, so we have 15 minutes, so Greta, please be straight with your questions so we also have a time to hear the answer.
Okay, so my question is, because we are talking about safety and making the surrounding safety and taking care of making, I don't know, events and like the talking safe. But I have always like this this thought in my mind that how far should I be like honest with people about potential danger of the events or something like that, to not like scare them like anymore or something like that, because there's like this part every time, like this balance between like being completely honest and like showing what's going on like behind the curtain and what's going on like on the event or during like the meeting or something like that. And do you have like these tips, or do you have any experience with like keeping this balance between, you know, like this things behind the curtain and this what's going on like on the stage?
I don't know if this is going to answer your question directly, but there was something when you were sharing earlier. We have individuals and organizations here who do safety planning for organizing groups, who sort of specialize in working with different groups to think through both like what are the dangers that actually exist either in meeting together or in online organizing or in different places, and how you might respond in meaningful ways in those situations. And you know, I think that is both a really practical tool for people who are doing organizing to have, because I think there is risk involved, there is danger involved, and oftentimes we don't know, we're making best guesses around what that might be, right? And I do think it's important to be honest and share that with people. But I also think it can be a really powerful community building tool to do safety planning together, to be able to think through what are the potentialities that could exist here, right? Like in, for example, gathering in this space, or in being in have an open social media group versus protests and other sort of visible spaces. There's often people who have special training as medics, or special training in dealing with cops, or special training in sort of like getting people out of situations, like creating opportunities for people to develop those skill sets and actually build out the community care within the literal group that you're organizing, I think can be both sort of strategically important, like to create literal safety, and also could be really impactful in terms of building the skill set and the tool and the connection between the people that you're organizing with, to not only share with you sort of like if what you mean is behind the curtain, the like dangers and the realities of being openly queer and trans in places where that isn't only always safe, but also coming up with the solutions of how to keep one another safe, because I think oftentimes we are our best resources in that, and the more that we can skill ourselves and each other up, the more likely it is that if we are in a dangerous situation or if something happens, that we'll be able to respond how we want to. So I know this is something that like I do this with my family. I do this like in different spaces. Like we've had to think about how to do it at Pride Foundation's offices over the years, right? When situations have happened. And so I think those are like some individual experiences, but I think like, you know, we have funded groups to sort of bring in safety planning experts to sort of help them think through their digital security, to think through like their physical security, those kinds of things as well. Jose and Kim, I don't know if you have additional things to add there. Or if Greta, that answered your question.
Yeah. I'll just offer that, you know, philanthropic entities to some degree are conveners and creators. So what are you doing as a convener and what are you doing as a creator for safety, right? And those are going to be different. There's going to be different things involved there. And like Katie was saying, you know, when you're convening people, you can use like a tool like the one that's in the chat, which is like pod mapping. Some of y'all might have seen this already, right? And it just comes from the idea that each person has to only take care of like 6 or 7 people around them. That's how birds take care of each other and they're able to fly. And so that's how we're able to fly too, and form all of those shapes. So that's where that comes from. And oh, I was just going to share also a quick story, which is that, you know, I come from farm working parents, and we worked in the fields, and there's a lot of pesticides in the fields, and the laws around pesticides didn't change until like around 2000. But by then my parents were working in the fields a lot, and community members knew that there was something wrong with the pesticides, and the laws did eventually change to reflect the fact that they were right. But before the laws changed, what community members were doing was telling each other, you have to take a shower before and after work, right? And you can't interact with anybody before and after work. And it was something so simple, but that honestly saved a lot of people's lives, because these pesticides were proven to be causing cancer. And it's just, the community knows. The community knows. It's like, take a shower, you know, it's like, it's something that people know what to do to take care of each other, and just kind of hearing those spaces and creating opportunities to hear them.
Yeah, it's so great what you said. I think it's the same, like the same wisdom that, you know, as a foundation that the grantees have about their communities, also for the like local community leaders, also your community knows, so you can also use this piece of advice and just ask them. So that really works in different on different levels. Mariusz, did you have a question, or did I? Or no? Okay, czy Mariusz miał pytanie? Tak? Okay, so just a second. So guys from Pride Foundation, you need to have the English set, because Mariusz is asking through our sign language interpreter into Polish, then Polish into English, and then to your English. So please have this set. Okay.
Jedną chwileczkę, bo są troszeczkę problemy techniczne. Dobrze, nazywam się Mariusz. Jestem z Polski, jestem osobą głuchą i mówiliście tutaj o społeczności lokalnej i ja chcę się odnieść do społeczności lokalnej osób głuchych LGBT. Przepraszam, ale niestety bardzo zacina internet i nie mogę wykonać tego tłumaczenia, bo nie ma pełnej widoczności znaków migowych. Przepraszam, przekazuję tutaj Mariuszowi informację, że nie mogę wykonać tłumaczenia, bo widzę tylko częściowo znaki migowe, które jestem w stanie odczytać.
Wyłączymy swoje kamery. Maybe we should just turn off our cameras to like give the internet more like speed or something.
Dobrze, to spróbujmy. Dobrze, w takim razie powtórzę. Nazywam się Mariusz. Jestem prezesem Fundacji Cicha Tęcza. Reprezentuję głuchych z terenu Warszawy i jestem jedyną tutaj taką osobą. Chciałbym zadać pytanie, jeżeli chodzi o tą lokalną społeczność albo o miejsce współpracy, też chciałbym powiedzieć, chciałbym zapytać, czy tam spotkaliście się właśnie z głuchymi, którzy tam po prostu funkcjonują i stykają się z tymi problemami?
Okay. I think I got the question. So how are we engaging with and mobilizing deaf community members where we work to some degree?
Yeah,
Right.
it's also a question if you maybe have some grantees with similar situation or some LGBT plus folks with disabilities or specifically deaf community.
Yeah, Kim, I think maybe could speak more. I don't know if we have a funded a community grantee that focuses specifically on deaf community members, but one of the things that your question raises for me is the idea of language justice, right? Which is something that's really close to my heart because my first language was in English. And so one of the things that we do, and at least in our internal meetings and that we encourage our partners to do, is certain things like having closed captions on our calls, right? Creating the environment that would enable us to actually be accessible, having sign interpreters like the one on the call now, and doing some experiments along those lines, and showing up to support, organizations that are led by people who are deaf, right? Because at the end of the day, that's kind of what has to be part of the work. And I know that there are some. I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I don't remember Katie or Kim, but that's what comes to mind as far as, how do we make ourselves more accessible? And definitely something that I think I love that you asked that question.
There is a group, Disability Rights Washington, who is one of our grantees who focuses on disability rights and justice for our communities. And over the years, I know there have been different community groups. In Oregon, there was a group called DHOR that was specifically around creating meetups for deaf and hard of hearing, queer and trans people. And they also did organizing work to make sure that there was more interpretation available at different events so that queer and trans events that were being held, started having interpretation at all of them through this resourcing and through raising sort of the visibility of that being a really critical access point. And it became, at least in Portland, where this group was organizing, an opportunity for a lot of queer and trans people to become interpreters and to be able to be available at those events. And so it created sort of this multi-level community building where events became more accessible and inclusive for people who were deaf and hard of hearing, and more members of our community became interpreters to be able to make those events accessible. And that whole group was led by deaf and hard of hearing people. And I just was looking them up the other day, and they're not meeting anymore, unfortunately, but I think that's also sort of how things kind of ebb and flow. And there's their legacy that they left is, at least in Portland, there are so many interpreters that you can find for events now to make sure that we can make them accessible. And Kim, I know you have lots of experience working with those folks and organizing them around events, so I don't know if you have anything to add here too.
I was just gonna say, Katie, you're being kind, because like Katie has long experience in event organizing also. And for a number of years when we had interpreters come to our events, she would usually know the queer trans interpreter that came to our event, and because they had built up this community and resource. But I think kind of my answer to your question too is that, like, I think what we have heard from community is that there is this compounding isolation and challenges similar to like broadly what our communities are facing, and that there are some different strategies that can be used, like Katie just shared, to help inform our community about how to make our events more accessible, and how to also then to address creating those spaces and meetups for the deaf and hard of hearing community too. That like it's both making all of our events accessible, but also creating space and connection for specific communities too.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add, like, highlighting some of the media that's already out there as far as narrative building and storytelling. For example, I know that Pride Foundation shared this short documentary, which is about a gay Latinx deaf love affair. So, you know, and sharing stories like this so that they can be visible, right? And this was shared on like our Facebook page, and like being able to put that media out there and encourage other people to share that with us. So.
Thank you very much for the answer. Mariusz is asking something else?
Chwileczkę, tak. Chciałbym jeszcze powiedzieć jedną rzecz. Osoby głuche same podejmują działania w sferze LGBT. Czy może słyszeliście o tym, czy osoby głuche właśnie podejmują takie działania samodzielnie?
If I'm hearing the question correctly, about deaf LGBTQ people. Oh, I see. Oh, hold on. About deaf LGBTQ people who have taken action. That's the question. I'm trying to think of specific stories from our region. Jose and Kim, is there anything that's coming to mind immediately?
Not with deaf community members. There are stories it depends on how because the disability community is like large. So for example, people who are in wheelchairs, I think we have more stories of that, of people in wheelchairs going to go and do advocacy and legislation. I myself am living with HIV, which is technically a disability in the United States. So, that's something, right? And so, openly sharing about that experience with people. And we have a lot of stories that I could tell you about that, right? That people could do around things like that. But I think that this is definitely an area of growth for us. I would say that this is an area of growth, and I'm grateful that in Poland they have your leadership, and that's something I want to celebrate, because we need more leaders like you. So yeah.
Yeah, I think just to underscore that, it's where I was like, why don't I have a story just off the top of my head to share? And I think that really highlights and points to the fact that our movement needs to continue, our movement and Pride Foundation as well, being a part of that, needs to find ways to increase that level of accessibility, not only for, being able to be included in these spaces, but so that these stories, these experiences, this leadership is elevated, so that when asked this question in a year from now, I hope I have multiple stories to be able to share with that. So, thank you for that. And I hope that if there is experiences that you're having or ways that you're doing that advocacy in Poland, I would love to hear what that has looked like, to just sort of learn from that as well.
Dobrze, dziękuję. Dziękuję bardzo.
I got tired even just watching the translation process from one to the other, to the third language. So that was a lot. But thank you very much. Thank you, Mariusz, for asking. Thank you guys for your answer. And unfortunately, we have passed 2 hours already. Unfortunately for me, for you, maybe it's good that you can go on with your day. But I'm so glad that you joined us. And Kim and Jose, it's so great to meet you. And thank you very much for joining us. And Katie, it's so great to talk to you once again. I'm leaving this meeting really inspired and with so much things to think about and to take for my own self-activism and for our fund. And I hope you guys also are taking some things for yourselves. If it would be okay, we would like to share the recording later on our YouTube for our grantees. So if it's okay with you, so everyone will be able to go back to the meeting and reflect once again on this. And so I think that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for sharing. Thank you for your time.
If I could just also, on behalf of us at Pride Foundation, just our deep appreciation and gratitude for being invited into this space, and for all of the work, Clara, that you did, and Ola, that you have done to bring this community together, and for the questions that people asked. Just know that we deeply appreciate being in community with you all. It's been incredible to get to connect, and we're all sharing our email addresses in the chat. Jose, thank you for kicking that off. Please do reach out to us. We hope that this is not the end of the connection points that we have, and we welcome any and all future connections, and just want to also underscore gratitude for the interpretation and all of the work that went in to make sure that this event was accessible, and you all really pulled that off beautifully. And just thank you all for the work that you're doing, and just know that there are folks like us all around the world who are cheering you on and who are in this fight and this work with you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that's also my closing statement. Also to thank the interpreters, both sign language and Polish English. Thank you all for your work today, and also Ola for all the technical support that you saw, that different videos were spotlighted or whatever it's called. Yeah, I think it's so great that we're like in these different parts of the world, but like we're fighting the same fight, or maybe not even fighting, but just wanting the same thing and doing everything we can to have it within our own communities. So I think it's so great to have this international, but also like even throughout Poland and throughout different languages connection. So thank you once again, and have like a great day in the Midwest or wherever you are, and have a great evening everyone here, because it's after 8 p.m. so it's time for evening activities, and I really hope we'll stay in touch, and it's not the last you hear of us, Pride Foundation. So thank you all, and